The New York Mets have landed their ace. Freddy Peralta is coming to New York.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. On today's show, we're talking Freddy Peralta, and this time it's real. The Mets have completed a blockbuster trade, sending Brandon Sproat and Jett Williams to Milwaukee for Freddy Peralta and likely Tobias Myers. Huge deal. We'll be breaking it all down. Before we get into any of it, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein, and covered the New York Mets since the 2019 season. This is the #1 daily podcast on the New York Mets. If you want to find some of my written work, you do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the editor-in-chief and where I spent today about an hour and a half on the Just Baseball show doing wild mock trades that we're going to talk about on Locked On Mets today on how the Mets go out and get an ace. And the whole point of that show and all this work I've been doing was, all right, the Mets have their position player group set. They need to swing for the fences to get an ace to complete this offseason because they are in win now mode. And we laid out what it would take for the Mets to get Tarek Skubal, what it would take for them to get Mason Miller and Nick Pivetta, what it would take for them to shoot a little bit lower and try to get a Pablo Lopez. And it all culminated with the trade that we've been talking about forever, the one that seemed obvious, the one that was obvious, which was that the New York Mets were going to pick up Freddy Peralta. And on that show, just like I've been talking about here at Locked On Mets, we discussed the idea of the Mets trading Brandon Sproat and Jett Williams, something that I floated months ago as what the Brewers would want for Freddy Peralta. And it makes perfect sense. Brandon Sproat gives them a cost-controlled starting pitcher, full control, 6 years, plug right into your rotation next season. Jett Williams is the Brewers archetype. He's quick. He puts bat to ball. He plays all over the field. They're going to love Jett Williams. Those were two players that were obvious fits for Milwaukee Brewers. It's a lot to give up for the Mets. 2 top 100 prospects, guys that could have been really big parts of the Mets team. I do not want to just focus right on Peralta and say, oh, the Mets just gave up nothing. They just got an ace, and Davis turns to a genius. This was a big-time trade with 2 major prospects going the other way because there was that much interest in Freddy Peralta. Because right now, if you had to pick a pitcher in Major League Baseball that's not pre-arb, so not Paul Skeens, guys who are in arbitration or signed on just contracts beyond their free agent or once they got to free agency, there might not be a better value proposition in the sport right now than Freddy Peralta at $8 million for the upcoming season. Every team could have added him. There was not a single team that was out of these trade sweepstakes. Any team that wanted to win this year could have got in, put prospects on the table to get this done. It was going to take 2 major pieces to swing this trade. And Brandon Sproat was always obvious because the Mets did not want to part with Jonathan. Jett Williams felt a little bit obvious to me because of how he fits the Brewers and because the Mets have AJ Ewing, who I think in some regards might have passed Jett a little bit within the organization. He's a more clean fit as a future center fielder, which is probably why the Mets valued Ewing over Jett and were willing to trade Jett in this deal. But you are willing to part with 2 huge prospects because what you're getting back is a guy who has done this over the last 3 seasons. 30 starts every single year, 165 innings every single year, 200 strikeouts every single year. And last season, he pitched to a 2.70 ERA as their ace, the guy that was carrying them, that was taking the ball every 5th day. He made 33 starts last year, 176 and 2/3 inning pitch, and had a 2.70 ERA. The Mets now have the option of extending Freddy Peralta, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. That would make this an easier trade to stomach because you would be lengthening your control of Freddy Peralta, but I don't even think that's what this is about. I don't think this is about trying to extend Freddy Peralta. I think this is about winning in 2026 and this guy being a top-tier rotation. That's what this is about. Now you're getting, apparently, it hasn't been confirmed, at least before I hit record. It sounds like the Mets will also be getting Tobias Myers, which adds another wrinkle in this deal because you're getting an arm in Tobias Myers that has team control, that is pre-arb. He still has, let's see, free agent in 2031, so 26, 7, 8, 9, 30. Yeah, 5 years of control. So that's where this trade got interesting. I've been talking about the idea of the Mets trading Brandon Sproat and Jett Williams all off season for Freddy Peralta. That was always what I felt like was going to be the package. But in my eyes, what the Mets would do is instead of getting Tobias Myers, I was looking at Trevor McGill, giving you a late inning arm to slide into that bullpen. But here's the thing about Trevor McGill. It's 2 years of control, and he's a relief arm. Tobias Myers, I think, could be an elite reliever. He also could theoretically start. I think for the Mets, ideally, they have him pitch as a reliever, because if they have him pitch as a reliever, that just helps this bullpen that needs another arm. If he can be lights out of the bullpen, I think that would really help this team. And obviously now your rotation with Peralta in place, you're looking at Freddy Peralta, Nolan McLean, David Peterson, Clay Holmes, Sean Manaea, and Kodai Senga. That is a really good 1 through 6 that allows you to have the upside of Senga in your rotation, but you're not as concerned about the downside of him not being healthy. Same goes with Manaea. And you have now the type of ace that really can carry you throughout large stretches of the season as the guy that you know every fifth day, he's your stopper. He's the guy that's going to go out on the mound and give you a really good chance to win. He's going to save the bullpen if the other starters aren't holding up their end of the bargain. They needed this guy. And the alternatives to Freddy Peralta right now for the New York Mets, it was whatever it takes to sign Framber. And after the Bo Bichette deal, after taking on $20 million with Luis Robert, didn't seem like they were going to do whatever it would take to get Framber Valdez. You also had to give up the comp picks. So you'd have to give up a third and a sixth pick after already giving up a second and a fifth. So you'd have everything. Your what? It's based on your highest selection. So it's not a direct rounds related. It's the Mets already gave up their second and fifth highest selection when they signed Bo Bichette. And then they would also, in turn, for Framber or Gallen, have to give up their third and their sixth. So now you wash your hands clean of that. You don't have to worry about trying to sign Framber. You're not going to sign Gallen. We knew that never was really a connection. And if you weren't signing one of those two arms, you weren't going to get a frontline arm in free agency. You just weren't. You could have signed Chris Bassett, but that would not have been the move that is an all-in win the World Series type move. So in free agency, you were pretty much down to really one option. Let's be honest, Framber. And if they weren't going to spend the money to get him on the trade market, it was down to Freddy Peralta and Mackenzie Gore are the two big names that are on the market. Well, Mackenzie Gore, you have the in-division tax because he's on the Nationals. So that's a tougher trade to pull off. And Mackenzie Gore, while he has a really high ceiling and he's an electric left-handed arm, he was a disaster in the second half last year. He's not a guy that you look at and say, all right, Mackenzie Gore, lead us to a World Series. Freddy Peralta can be that guy. He could be that guy. He's 29 years old, and the outcome here on Freddy Peralta is one of two things. Either you get the biggest bargain in the sport for a starting pitcher for a year with a guy trying to earn himself a mega deal if he wants to get to free agency, or you're going to end up locking him up to an extension that is better than anything you're going to sign in next year's free agent class. So, it might not mean that Tarek Skubal is part of the Mets in the future, but you have no idea if you can win those sweepstakes when you get there. To trade for him, it was going to cost Hong. It was going to cost quadruple the money potentially for this season. So Freddy Peralta always made the most sense for the New York Mets. And one of the things that I've been talking about when it comes to Freddy Peralta from the beginning was the plan of rent Peralta, buy Skubal. What I want to talk about next is, do the Mets have to buy Peralta and extend him, so to speak, to make this return worth it? Or is 1 year Freddy Peralta plus the team control on Tobias Myers worth giving up Brandon Sproat and Jett Williams? So we're going to go through that here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by TurboTax. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax full service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or the guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out the forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or online, and they will handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver and gives you a real peace of mind knowing that an expert is handling it personally. I'm all self-employed for my job, so taxes can be a hassle. TurboTax just makes my life so much easier. And for a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local tax expert for just $150 all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, you just filed by February 28th. And again, all in $150. Take the taxes off your plate and get back to your life by visiting turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. Again, that is turbotax.com/local. If you're watching on YouTube right now, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 16,000 subscribers. Now, again, this is a massive return going the other way. Brandon Sproat has a chance to be a really solid big league starter for some time. I'm sure the Brewers are buying into an upside that maybe he can be middle of the rotation to top of the rotation type arm. I think from the Mets perspective, you have landed an ace while holding on to Nolan McLean, who is always going to be off the table. And you kept Jonah Tong. I think the biggest thing about this trade is acquiring Freddy Peralta with what you still have in the system and still having Jonah Tong, who the Brewers asked about early on in the reports where the Mets shut that down. I think that was a big part in completing this trade and being willing to put Brandon Sproat on the table. He always seemed like the arm that if you had to trade one of them, it was probably Brandon Sproat because Jonah Tong has a little bit of a higher upside long-term. For this upcoming season, Brandon Sproat's more big league ready. So the Brewers get a guy that slides right into their rotation. It's a lot to give up. But again, when you were able to keep Tong, when you still have Weninger and Santucci behind them in the system that certainly could make a debut as early as this season, if not 2027, when you have Christian Scott off of TJ, the Mets have so much depth when it comes to their young arms that they could afford trading one, but it had to be in the right trade. And again, when you canvass the market, this was the guy to get. The part of this trade that hurts for me, it's not giving up Brandon Sproat. It's not. It's trading Jett Williams. Jett Williams is such a fun player. And I really love the idea of Jett Williams midseason. If Luis Robert wasn't hitting, he could have been your center fielder. If Francisco Lindor, will knock on wood, but if he ever got hurt, Jett Williams could have come up and been plug and play at short. Same thing at second with Marcus Semien. And I really love the combination of the speed, the versatility, the bat to ball. And I think that in the plate discipline in particular, but the thing with Jett Williams is I think throughout his big league career, he is going to keep adding power. I've made the comp in the past, and it's not to say, hey, Jett, go out and be a first ballot Hall of Famer, or maybe second ballot because of what Jose Altuve did with the sign stealing scandal. But regardless, Altuve is a Hall of Famer. And I've made the comp before, not that they're the same player, but that when Altuve was early in his career as a prospect, he didn't hit a ton of home runs. But he's a guy that is a shorter guy, so he had great plate discipline. It's tough to throw strikes to guys that are smaller, like Jett Williams, like Jose Altuve. And over time, because the baseball IQ is so high with Altuve, he's been able to add more and more power to the point where he's been a 30 home run hitting second baseman. And I think while most scouts are definitely not going to agree with me, I do think that that could be in the tank at some point for Jett Williams throughout his career. But even if you look at Altuve, that didn't happen right away. And the Mets are in win now mode. So when you look at the system and for the Mets top position players, this was always going to be one arm and one bat. When it comes to the top prospects, if it wasn't Jett Williams, Carson Bench obviously was on the table, then it probably is AJ Ewing because I don't know if the Brewers value the profile of a Ryan Clifford, of a Jacob Reimer, guys that are going to make it to the big leagues largely with their bat and not as much with their glove. I think the Brewers really value the speed, the defense. That's how they play the game. And Jett is plug and play. Jett Williams very well could become the starting shortstop of the Milwaukee Brewers. Joey Ortiz is the guy now, and if he's not hitting and Jett Williams is in AAA, you never know. That could be the move for the Brewers, and long term, who knows? This could be a trade that hurts because there is a chance that Jett Williams will tap into that star potential. I think it's more likely that you're talking about a guy that's going to be maybe below an all-star. But again, there's just that wide range of outcomes with the prospect that is this good. So it's not nothing to trade these guys. This wasn't I was excited when the trade came in. It's something we've been talking about on this show forever. It's the return that I called months ago. All of these things that were happening, it was conflicting because, yeah, in some regards, sure, this is something we've been going over time and again on the show. It makes sense. I don't think it's unfair value, but it's a lot to give up. And the return is right now a year of Freddy Peralta and 5 years of Tobias Myers. Again, if the Mets sign, let's just say they signed Freddy Peralta to a deal that's better than the one that Dylan Cease got, which I think is sort of the baseline, right? Dylan Cease got 7 for 210. There was deferred money. I think the present day value was like 7 for 180, 190. Regardless, if the Mets signed Freddy Peralta to a 7-year extension that pays him $150 million, that's a really good deal. And that sort of changes the look of this trade because now there's so much control of Peralta that it's like, all right, fine. Yeah, you gave up Jett, you gave up Sproat, but Peralta's your ace for the rest of the decade. That would be awesome. I don't know if the Mets are going to do that. I don't know if the Mets, after what they've already spent on this roster, are going to turn around and lock Peralta up to a bigger number that they're going to have to pay 110% surcharge on, have him signed to a long-term deal when they've been averse to giving them out this offseason anyway. And then does that take you out of the running next year for Terry Skubal if you wanted to get into those conversations? That's why I'm not going to say right now, oh, he's going to get extended. They traded this much to get him. He's definitely going to get extended. Ultimately, we have to look at the second piece that's coming back to the Mets in this deal. And all reports were that it's Tobias Myers, 27-year-old. We watched him make a start against the Mets in the playoffs back in 2024. It's a pretty good one. Didn't give up a run across 5 innings. If you remember that game, pretty big game. A lot of stuff happened in that game. Did Pete Alonso hit a home run against a pitcher? Who was it? Oh, wait, no, we're not talking about that. Devin Williams. We don't want to talk about that one. But it is funny that now all these guys are Mets. You look at what Tobias Myers brings to the table. He is a pitcher that has electric stuff at times. He had this breakout season in 2024 where across 138 innings, he had a flat 3 ERA. Last year, it was 50 2/3 innings pitched. I believe there was some injury mixed in there, and he was more out of the bullpen. Then that's the really interesting one for the Mets in this because they were able to get an arm back from the Brewers that they obviously like, who has 5 years of team control. And that, I think, for the Mets was probably more attractive even than trying to get Trevor McGill. And we'll see. I think the Brewers, who are still trying to win this year, they maybe didn't want to trade Trevor McGill and give up their closer because it's not like this is, all right, we're trading our ace and we're moving into a rebuild. This is just how the Brewers operate, getting the most value for their assets. And Freddy Peralta was just way more valuable to the Brewers in a trade than hanging on to him for one last ride. So they pull the trigger, and it takes a lot for the Mets to get him, and that's the deal. You look at it from a Brewers perspective, and on that show I mentioned where I was on the Just Baseball show earlier tonight, we were going through all these mock trades. RM Layton mentioned from a WAR perspective, which is how a lot of these front office executives think about it. You look at Jett Williams and Brandon Sproat, and let's say you sort of project out 2 WAR per season for each of them over the 6 years of control. You're talking about close to 25 WAR over the next 6 years. Freddy Peralta in 1 year is not getting anywhere close to 25 WAR, but you're obviously paying for the value right now and what Peralta can bring to the table for this current team that's trying to win a World Series. So that's already sort of like a losing proposition when you're trading for a rental ace, is you're going to be giving up way more control, which ultimately over the life of a deal is going to eventually skew the Brewers' way, most likely, assuming that Sproat and Jett pan out. It's not like any of us want to root against those guys from panning out. Tobias Myers is the interesting piece in this because it gives the Mets something else that they can fall back on, even if Freddy Peralta is a rental. Because if he is, the Mets tag him with the qualifying offer. Next year, they get draft picks back for Peralta if he signs elsewhere. Who knows, if the Mets sign Skubal, those draft picks can almost kind of counteract each other. I think you end up getting back as a luxury tax team less and you give up more. So it will be an exact swap of draft picks, but we could see that unfold once we get to a year from now. But that's sort of the way that this return looks beyond 2026 until Peralta is extended. If he is, you'll have Tobias Myers around for 4 more years beyond 2026. And you'll have the comp picks that'll come back for Peralta signing elsewhere if he does. And then you're at that point, the trade closes. Basically, it's just seeing how those pieces are going to finish out the next 5 years with Sproat and Jett in Milwaukee and Tobias Myers sticking around with whatever those draft picks become. But you have to give up a lot to get a pitcher that's this good. And the Mets needed a pitcher this good. You look at what they have done over this past week and change. I don't remember the exact day that Boba shit happened, but I think it's all been in a week. It's been a transformative week of transactions where the Mets have taken this team where we were wondering, okay, what's the next move? Every time they made a move. Okay, well, they got Polanco, but is he playing for what's next? They got Devin Williams. Is at that time, that was the first one. It was, is Edwin Diaz next? Okay, he's not. Diaz is out. Are the Mets going to sign Pete Alonso? No, they didn't. And it went on and on and on like that. And they made all these moves. We were wondering, okay, yeah, sure. Maybe your bullpen was the same with Devin Williams and Luke Weaver compared to Edwin Diaz. Maybe Jorge Polanco and Marcus Semien were nice ads, but you still needed another bat. And how are they going to figure it all out? Oh, is it Kyle Tucker? We did that whole pursuit. And when that didn't come back to the Mets, their pivot was quick. It was swift. They get Bo Bichette. A couple days later, they trade for Luis Robert. And the next day, they're trading for Freddy Peralta, and they're checking off all the boxes. Not to mention, I haven't even talked about on this show, Luis Garcia. So we'll touch on that one because I haven't even talked about that. Also, I keep on forgetting to mention this on the show, and I keep on doing extra shows, and it keeps on slipping my mind. So I'm going to take a second now before I forget it again. Congratulations to Carlos Beltran for being a Hall of Famer. That's still cool. Good chance that they retire number 15 now, assuming Beltran goes in as a Met. Very similar when Piazza got into the Hall of Fame where, all right, you're in the Hall, you're in Cooperstown. Now you can get number 15 in the rafters. Really cool thing for Beltran. So I finally got that on the airwaves. We're going to take a quick second for the audio replay, and then I'm going to finish out the final second. We'll touch on Luis Garcia, and we're just going to look at where this roster's at overall after all of these big moves. Thank you all for tuning in right now. If you want to be an everydayer, if Locked On Mets is part of your everyday routine, then you should be an everydayer and get Locked On Mets without the interruptions. You go to lockedonpodcast.com/everydayer or lockedonmets.supercast. You can get access to the Everydayer Club where you get that ad-free version of Locked On Mets. You also will get access to our Discord channel for Mets fans. You can talk to a bunch of Locked On Mets listeners, and you get access to the merch shop. Again, that is lockedonmets.supercast. All right, so let's talk about where this team's at after all of this movement. I think this lineup right now is better than the one from last year. Maybe not offensively, but it's a more complete team. You have the defense that we've been promised, the long talked about run prevention. Marcus Semien at second and Luis Robert in center is a big upgrade to your run prevention. And left, Carson Bench likely breaks camp as your starting left fielder, and there's a 10-year difference between Carson Bench and Brandon Nimmo on the athletics age scale. And so with Nimmo's athleticism going the wrong way, Bench is going up, you're going to see a much better version of the Mets defensively with Bench in left, Robert in center, and Semien at second base. That's going to be huge. Today they talked about, or David Stearns talked about, having 4 shortstops on the infield. They really believe that Jorge Polanco is going to be a good defensive first baseman. They believe that Bo Bichette can make the transition to third. But I'll tell you what, there was a lot of games last year where we saw Pete Alonso at first, Mark Vientos at third, Jeff McNeil in center, and Brandon Nimmo in left. There's not as many holes. I would even venture to say that certainly Bichette and Polanco is going to be better than Vientos and Alonso. Granted, there was a lot of games last year where it was Beatty at third, and I don't know if Bichette's going to be that good, but guess what? Beatty's still on the team. So you still have a lot of versatility on this roster. You can move guys around. Beatty's going to be in the super utility role, so we can see him at second base some days. So maybe Marcus Semien, although he hangs his hat on playing every day, I think if you play Marcus Semien 135 games a season, you pick his matchups a little bit, you might get a better version of him. You can have Beatty get games there, get some games at third if you want to DH Bo for a day or two. You can put him at first. You can play him in left. And I think that's going to be the competition that we actually see in camp. I think most things are set. Luis Robert's going to get the run at the start of the season in center field. So I think left field is the one position that's up for grabs. And it's up for grabs between Carson Bench, Tyrone Taylor, any other random outfielder that's in camp if you want to throw a Christian Pache or all these other guys. But Giovanni Bay, doesn't matter. It's really going to be Tyrone Taylor, Carson Bench, and Brett Beatty. Who can give you the most offense and defense at that spot to start the season? If Bench doesn't have a good enough spring, I think it's going to be Brett Beatty starting in left because I think Beatty will have proven at that point that he can play out there. But this position player group, as David Stearns was alluding to at the Bo Bichette presser, it's good. It's all sewn up. Yes, there's one open bench spot. Sure, the Mets could do something with that, but they can also just let that go to Jared Young or G1 Bay or whoever it is. It doesn't really matter. That last piece probably not playing that much anyway. So I like where this lineup is. They might not have as much home run power because they lost Pete Alonso, but I think Bo Bichette's a pretty good run producer. I think that Polanco and Semien and Robert are a very interesting grouping compared to McNeil and Nimmo. So I really like where this lineup's at. And then the one hole was the top of your rotation. Everyone remembers how this last season, 2025, fell apart for the Mets because of the rotation. Well, now you get a guy that can lead that group. And you have a full year of Nolan McLean. I think that's a massive difference. I don't think the Mets have to do anything else to this rotation. They're good. They got 6 viable big league starters going into camp, and that's not even including Jonah Tong or Christian Scott. 6 guys that you just think, well, and that's not even mentioning Tobias Myers, who could theoretically be part of this rotation. So it's a very interesting set of moves that the New York Mets have made, and it has put in this position where you can say this is the best team in the National League East. And I think I'm going to do a follow-up for tomorrow morning. We'll let this trade, or maybe I'll post something midday tomorrow, but regardless, I do want to dive deeper into this roster, what everything looks like. And to me, I think you look at the rest of this division, and I'm sorry. I think this is the best team in the NL East. I want to throw a couple questions up real quick. I like this comment. Vientos returns to Swaggy V. He's the power bat they need. And I think that's slated to be a bench bat. But as things progress, there's going to be injuries. You have that counter. So if Polanco goes down, all right, Vientos can be your first baseman or your DH, and Beatty is your first baseman. Thank you for that. And then Ryan working overtime, 3 videos today. Yeah. David Stern's not letting me take a break. All right. I was lying down just trying to recover from all the shows I've recorded, and boom, big move. So, but it's awesome that the Mets have been this active. This is what we wanted. This is what we wanted from the beginning, is the Mets to make big moves and change this team. And they've done that. Does Tobias Myers have options? Which is a great point. I'm glad somebody mentioned that. I think that also helps a lot, because you could park them in AAA the same way you could have with Brandon Sproat. If you want it to be rotation depth, you keep them stretched out in spring and you park them in the Syracuse Mets rotation. And that might be the move. I think it's going to be interesting to see what they think of Tobias Myers. Do they think he's a better reliever? Do they think he's a better starter? Honestly, I just haven't had the time to do enough digging on Tobias Myers. But that's the type of thing I can do more on a follow-up show, not a rapid reaction, where we can go through and we can, really dive deep into the arsenal and what he brings to the table. I like this one. Ryan, second best roster in baseball. Look, I throw them up there with any other team in the National League. I like the Blue Jays a lot. The Yankees still have a good roster. So I have to really think about second best in baseball. But the National League, again, if they're the best team in the NL East, which I think they are, then it comes down to the Cubs and the Brewers are the other teams. So it's a tough one. I think they're up there. And Cubs are better. Yeah, maybe. They very well could be. The Cubs have done a lot. So that's what I would say. I think best in the NL East is easier for me to say off the cuff. The more that we dive into it, the more that we look at it, we'll see. Thoughts on AJ Ewing on the Baseball America Top 100? Look, at Just Baseball where I work, geez, knocking my mic, we have AJ Ewing ranked above Jett Williams. And I had a lot of conversations with Aram Layton about that, where why did he like AJ Ewing over Jett Williams? And the reason is because what does Jett Williams bring to the table? Like, what are the things that we'd say? All right, the speed and athleticism. AJ Ewing has that. He might be even more athletic. He might even have more speed, and he's better suited to play center field. AJ Ewing is than Jett. So a better chance that you're going to get a plus defensive center fielder with AJ Ewing. Oh, well, Jett can go over and play second base, a former shortstop. AJ Ewing's a former shortstop. He also can and still has been playing second base. So I think when you already can check off the box of the defense and the versatility, well, then it just comes down to which bat do you believe in more. And there's a lot of people that are buying AJ Ewing, still having another level he can get to. Jett Williams has accomplished more so far in his career, but I do think that the Mets very well could value AJ Ewing more. I think if the Mets like Jett Williams more and they try to pull off this trade by putting AJ Ewing in the deal, I don't know if the Brewers would have scoffed at that. You know what I mean? I think it's a really close, the conversation between AJ Ewing and Jett. And ultimately, clearly they like Ewing more because Jett is gone. I like this. I like AJ Ewing over Jett, especially now that Jett is gone. Yeah, of course. This was, again, a trade where you gave up a lot, but we have to remember, while the Mets traded a lot to get this done, you had to, because the Yankees right now are looking at their offseason. How'd the Yankees get better? They brought back Cody Bellinger. They brought back Ahmed Rosario and Paul Blackburn, funny enough, former Mets. But the Yankees are not much different than last year. They were a really good team last year. But right now, they're looking and they're in their war room trying to figure out, okay, what can we do to make our team better? And the best move they could have made was trading for Freddy Peralta. And that's just the Yankees. There are a lot of teams who could have been saying the exact same thing. The Atlanta Braves, Freddy Peralta fit under their payroll now, and he's the exact type of guy that they would have targeted to trade for and extend. So that's just two rivals of the Mets that would have been in. And there's a lot more teams that could have gotten in the mix. And so because of that competition, you have to trade a lot. But what you're getting is a guy that is going to have a chance to win the World Series this year. I think I'm going to wrap it up on that note. Again, I'm going to take some time here. I'm going to read everything I can. Certainly going to bone up on Tobias Myers, and we'll do another show that's going to come out at some point tomorrow where I will look into this lens of having the time to read up on things and think about it more. But where I'm at right now is I think the New York Mets are the best team in the National League East. And that's probably what the next show is going to be. After trading for Freddy Peralta, are the Mets the best team in the NL East? How many teams are better than them in baseball? What else do they have to do? Luis Garcia. We'll talk about that then too. Luis Garcia, they got a hard-throwing reliever for $1.75 million. That one really just went quietly in between two massive trades. Certainly this one qualified as massive, but even the Robert trade with the star power was pretty big. And a Bo Bichette introductory press conference. All of that in the last 24 hours. And Luis Garcia's little $1.75 million deal has slid under the surface. But another good arm for the bullpen. If there's anywhere else the Mets have to add, it's probably there. But honestly, they're sitting pretty. This looks like a team that is ready to go, that's ready for spring training, and ready to do a lot of winning in 2026. And I am excited about it. I can't wait to continue to cover what's next for this team and to have you all tuning in throughout the season. Thank you for watching the live stream. Appreciate all of you who also are going to listen to the playback on audio or video. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network.